What's up, everyone? Baxter Stockman with the Week 2 10-Ton Hammer review. A lot happened this week. Same number of games. Actually, plus one in the number of games, finally. Full complement of 16 games. So, yeah, getting right into it. The first matchup, we got the Alabama Whiteskins facing off against Monsanto Wellwater. Yeah, this one was chalked up as a win by the Whiteskins, and Monsanto Wellwater barely got over 70 points. Their total was 72.1. Good showing by Alex Smith, 251 yards and a touchdown. Can't ask too much more from your QB with that. Lamar Miller, pretty much the same score as last week, 11.7 fantasy points. And the only other double-digit score was the Arizona defense. Got an interception and 13 points allowed. On the other side of the ball, Alabama Whiteskins got Russell Wilson with 15.3 fantasy points, 198 yards and a touchdown. Had a lot of trouble for some reason with the San Francisco 49ers, but the Seahawks managed to get a win somehow. Bilal Powell, 13 yards, pretty sad. Ezekiel Elliott, 8 yards. Career worst game against the Denver Broncos, no surprise there. Julio Jones, though, killed it against Green Bay, 15.8 fantasy points, got over 100 yards. Doug Baldwin, 10.4 fantasy points, had some receptions there. Alshon Jeffrey finally had a good week against Kansas City, 92 yards and a touchdown, 22.2 fantasy points. So, yeah, Alabama Whiteskins comes away with a win. I think he's 1-1. Monsanto Wellwater, 0-2. Next matchup, you have ex-employee of ESPN versus Gin and Tonic. This one involved the comeback of the week. So going into Sunday Night Football, ex-employee had a 20-point lead, and he still had Aaron Rodgers, Jordy Nelson, and Crosby, the kicker for Green Bay, to go. And all Gin and Tonic had left was Devonta Freeman and Ty Montgomery. So basically, in order for Gin and Tonic to win, a miracle needed to happen. It had to be this weird combination of Devonta Freeman and Ty Montgomery going off, while Aaron Rodgers, Jordy Nelson, and Mason Crosby did terrible. So the conditions necessary for winning were you need to have lightning to strike, 3 tornadoes to touchdown, an earthquake to happen right under the studio, the ground to crack open, dinosaurs to come out, have those dinosaurs breathe fire right on Jordy Nelson, and at the same time, the dinosaurs carrying Ty Montgomery and Devonta Freeman continuously into the end zone. And that's exactly what happened. So, Gin and Tonic, 128.6 total fantasy points. Started Phillip Rivers, 17.2 fantasy points. Got James White, a lot of PPR points there. One of the main parts of that New England offense, one of the rare predictable parts, 17.6 fantasy points. Devonta Freeman went off, 2 touchdowns, 84 yards. Yeah, the Falcons just came out the gate swinging on that one. And Ty Montgomery, 35 total yards, 2 total touchdowns. A lot of PPR points, and got 16 kicker points from Chris Boswell of the Pittsburgh Steelers. On the side of ex-employee, Aaron Rodgers, even with that terrible game, he still had 343 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception, 18.5 fantasy points. Quiz Show Rodgers, 67 yards and a touchdown, not bad, 12.7 fantasy points. C.J. Anderson, top running back of the week, if I'm not mistaken. 118 yards, 2 total touchdowns, just demolished Dallas over there in Mile High Stadium, 30.4 fantasy points. Delaney Walker, again, main part of the offense there in Tennessee, 16.2 fantasy points. Keenan Allen, good kind of balance for getting tonic playing Phillip Rivers. He had 4 catches, 61 yards, and a rushing touchdown, 16.2 fantasy points. 9 receptions, 100 yards, 19 fantasy points. And, of course, the highlight is Jordy Nelson just laying a goose egg, 0 fantasy points. So getting tonic improves to 2-0. Ex-employee falls to 1-1. Next matchup, we got the newly named 2 Girlies 1 Cup versus last year's finalist Toon Squad. Toon Squad takes the cake on this one. Their total is 131.7 fantasy points. 2 Girlies 1 Cup scoring 107.3 fantasy points. 2 Girlies 1 Cup started Matthew Stafford. Not a great game. But the Lions came away with a win. Stafford got 122 yards, 2 touchdowns, so 13.2 fantasy points. Todd Gurley back to his rookie form, just blowing it up, 88 yards, 2 total touchdowns. Even with a fumble, he still got 26.6 fantasy points. Demaryius Thomas with a very respectable 13.1 fantasy points. He was a big part of the passing game along with Emmanuel Sanders in that pretty one-sided victory by the Denver Broncos. Zach Ertz, great value pickup, still scoring in week 2, 5 receptions, 97 yards. That comes up to 14.7 fantasy points. Then you got Davante Adams in the lack of Jordy Nelson. He's one of the receivers to reap the rewards. 8 receptions, 99 yards, and a touchdown, 23.9 fantasy points. 2 Girlies 1 Cup rolled the dice with the Jacksonville defense. Didn't work out too well this time because somehow Tennessee made a comeback. So with an interception and 37 points allowed, they got -1 fantasy points. Honorable mention, Young Ho, or Young Wah as it's pronounced. 4 kicker points for 2 Girlies 1 Cup. Meanwhile, Toon Squad, I think got the highest score this week. So Derek Carr, 3 touchdowns all to Michael Crabtree. Le'Veon Bell, not great, but especially for a first pick overall, 87 yards, 13.1 fantasy points. Leonard Fournette, looks like they're trying to feature him over there in Jacksonville, 40 yards and a touchdown. Chris Hogan, another beneficiary of the injuries in New England, with Amendola and Edelman out, 18.8 fantasy points. And Travis Zeus Kelce, man, his freaking roster's just stacked. So 24.3 fantasy points from 103 yards and a touchdown. Tariq Cohen, not great as far as rushing, but got a lot of PPR points there, 12.8 fantasy points, which adds up to a win for Toon Squad. Both of these teams, I think, have 1 win, 1 loss, if I'm not mistaken. Next matchup, it's champion versus champion. You got System of a Touchdown versus my ball Zach Ertz. System of a Touchdown comes away with a win, 124 fantasy points exactly. My ball Zach Ertz, they drafted high on Tom Brady. That paid off at least on points. An incredible 447 yards and 3 touchdowns. You're welcome, New Orleans Saints. 30.8 fantasy points. Let's see here. Kelvin Benjamin did some damage. 6 catches, 77 yards. Got Kobe Fleener. 3 receptions, 33 yards and a touchdown for New Orleans. 12.3 fantasy points. Terrence West, some good PPR points and a touchdown, 12.5. Baltimore defense versus the Cleveland Browns. No surprise there. 4 interceptions, a fumble recovery, and 10 points allowed. That's 15 fantasy points. And Gostkowski, gifted once again by the New Orleans Saints, had 12 kicker points total. He missed an extra point. But meanwhile, in the red corner, System of a Touchdown, was propelled to victory by Carson Palmer, 15.9 fantasy points. That's not great, but the numbers are all there. 332 yards and a touchdown with the interception. Mike Evans just went off. 7 catches, 93 yards and a touchdown, 22.3 fantasy points. Javorius Buck Allen for Baltimore had 66 yards and receiving touchdown, 21.1 fantasy points. So yeah, congrats, system of a touchdown. Thing goes to 1-1. My Balzac Ertz falls to 1-1. And here we got pretty one-sided victory by Long Duck Dong over Harry Balzania. It seemed like Harry Balzania was going to come away with the win, but then 3 touchdowns to Michael Crabtree, 32 fantasy points. That's going to be pretty tough to overcome for any team. Another well-placed start for Long Duck Dong was Hunter Henry. Got some attention this weekend. 7 catches, 80 yards, 15 fantasy points. Nothing else of note. I mean, Matt Ryan in that very very dominant game by Atlanta, 252 yards and a touchdown, 14.9 fantasy points. Harry Balzania to total 82.5 points. Started Cam Newton, 11.8 fantasy points. Marshawn Lynch, too bad he doesn't get points for dancing, 11.9 fantasy points. Carlos Hyde, not on a great team, but a great fantasy asset nonetheless, 17.3 fantasy points with 124 yards. Antonio Brown, 11.2 fantasy points, not exactly what you're looking for when you're drafting someone that high, but it is what it is. And that's about it. Tyreek the Freak Hill kind of underperformed there against Philly, 8.9 fantasy points. So Long Duck Dong comes away with the win. And the final matchup of the week is the Ohio State Buckeyes versus the Huntress. Ohio State Buckeyes got a total of 101.5 fantasy points. Drew Brees, typical game for him at home, 356 yards, 2 touchdowns, 22.2 fantasy points. Isaiah Crowell got stifled there by Baltimore, 37 yards total, which comes up to 3.7 fantasy points. Melvin Gordon for the Chargers doing the damn thing, 20.8 fantasy points, a lot of PPR points there in the touchdown. Hopkins got like half of the total passes on the Thursday night game from his new quarterback. So 7 catches, 73 yards, 14.3 fantasy points. Matt Forte did a little better than Bilal Palau over there for the Jets, 13.1 fantasy points. And again, Matt Bryant, honorable mention, 14 kicker points. 101.5, pretty good score, a little on the low side for full point PPR. 120 is a better average. The Huntress scored 129.9 fantasy points. With Kirk Cousins, had a lot of trouble there. That offense in Washington ain't looking so hot. 179 yards and a touchdown, 11.9 fantasy points. Jay Ajayi, who the Miami Dolphins are just going to feed the ball and make him run until he disintegrates, came out the gate with 122 yards, 14.6 fantasy points. Kareem the Dream Hunt does his thing, 81 yards, 2 touchdowns, 25.9 fantasy points. Now that is a first-round fantasy score right there. Randall Cobb, a beneficiary of all the injuries there happening in Green Bay, 6 catches, 60 yards, 13 fantasy points. Rob Gronkowski back to his expected form before he got Gronkowski groined. 6 catches, 116 yards and a touchdown, 23.6 fantasy points. Martavis Bryant finally warmed up after being suspended and out of the game for a year plus. 18.8 fantasy points from 91 yards and a touchdown. Oakland defense against the Jets, of course, a pretty easy call there. So the Huntress improves to 2-0, while Ohio State Buckeyes fall to 0-2. And that about wraps it up. Just be on the lookout for Kevin's write-up later on. And yeah, this is Baxter Stockman signing off like a 10-ton hammer, son.